Alright everybody, I'm going to have to let my tea cool down a little bit. How are y'all doing today? Welcome to the Unglobalist, Tuesday, February 19th, and this is the news in 2019. Alright everybody, United States news. A previously unknown disease blows through California on the wind currents. It's not so much unknown as it is unknown within the United States. Since the beginning of 2019, 16 kids have been diagnosed with Kawasaki disease. According to the San Diego County Health and Human Services Agency, dailymail.co.uk reports, researchers at the UC San Diego School of Medicine told the agency that twice as many children have been diagnosed compared with previous years. Experts say the condition can be weather-related and that the triggers of the disease have come over to the U.S. wind from Asia. Although scientists are not sure what causes the disease, past studies have shown that climate and environmental patterns may play a role. We want community healthcare providers to have increased vigilance for Kawasaki disease cases during these periods of wet, cool weather, said Dr. Jane Burns, a pediatrician at Rhodes Children's Hospital, San Diego, and director of the Kawasaki Disease Research Center, said in a statement. The climate patterns that are associated with increased numbers of children diagnosed have occurred more frequently here so far this year. Kawasaki disease is a condition that causes inflammation in the walls of the blood vessels and affects mostly children under 5 years old. The inflammation can weaken or damage the coronary arteries, which supply the heart with blood. This can lead to aneurysms, heart attacks, or heart failure, which is why Kawasaki disease is known as one of the leading causes of heart disease in children. According to the American Heart Association, or AHA, symptoms include a fever, a rash, swollen hands and feet, redness in the whites of the eyes, and swollen lymph glands in the throat. Treatment usually comes in the form of aspirin for the fever and rash and intravenous immunoglobulin therapy, a treatment made from donated blood to reduce the risk of coronary artery abnormalities from developing. Kawasaki disease is not an illness many physicians have diagnosed, and it can initially be confused with other common illnesses, said County Public Health Officer Dr. Wilma Wooten. In a press release, we are alerting health professionals and parents today to raise awareness of the increased Kawasaki disease activity currently in our community. The San Diego Health and Human Services Agency says cases have been rising in the county over the last 30 years. In the 1990s, 10 in 100,000 children in San Diego under 5 years old were affected by the disease. However, between 2010 to 2015, the incidence rose to 25.5 in 100,000 children under age 5. Occurrences of Kawasaki disease are most common in Japan, and Asians are more statistically prone to acquiring it. Half European, half Asian folks are also statistically more vulnerable. That is not to say that there are not people of more pure European descent or African descent who cannot get Kawasaki. It's just more common among Asians and half Asians. And no one really knows what causes Kawasaki's disease, but it appears to have some relation to weather phenomenon. It's rather bizarre, really. It's almost like something straight out of a weird sci-fi movie or a weird horror movie. Wouldn't be surprised if Stephen King came up with a story based on Kawasaki disease. It's just very strange, and there's just so little known about it. I really don't have much of an opinion to offer. I'm just going to give you the facts for now. An 11-year-old boy was arrested and jailed for not reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. 1984. According to the boy's mother, Dakhira Talbot, her son politely refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance at Lowton Child's Middle Academy in Lakeland, Florida. The class had a substitute teacher that day who felt it was her duty to force students to pledge their obedience to the American flag. The FreeThoughtProject.com reports, when the boy refused to stand for the pledge, the teacher gave the standard statist response of, "Why, if it was so bad here, he did not go to another place to live." This is the more polite version of "move to Somalia." But the boy had an answer ready, saying, "They brought me here." Despite the entire inappropriate conversation with the 11-year-old, the teacher kept pressing the issue, telling the child, "Well, you can always go back." After instigating the entire debacle, the teacher then called the office to remove the student from class for daring to assert his freedom of speech. Then I had to call the office because I did not want to continue dealing with him, so the teacher said. She was wrong. She was way out of place, the boy's mother said. If she felt like there was an issue with my son not standing for the flag, she should have resolved it. She should have resolved that in a different manner than she did. When the student refused to be bullied by a system he feels is out to get people of color like him, the system then proved his claims, unfortunately. The school police officer then responded to the classroom and arrested the child. Obviously, the system shouldn't be out to get the people of color, and in principle, on paper, it's not. But I think some people, the way they act will validate the claims, however false, with this kind of pro-statist behavior. He was arrested and charged with multiple misdemeanors and brought to juvenile detention. Multiple misdemeanors. As News 9 reports, according to the arrest of affidavit, the student was arrested by the school resource officer because he refused to follow multiple commands, repeatedly called school leaders racist, and was disruptive. They said he threatened to get the school resource officer and principal fired and to beat the teacher. The boy admitted to being disruptive because of the situation, being forced to pledge allegiance, but he and his mother both dispute the claim of threatening the teacher. The teacher has since been removed from the system, and the school district says they are investigating the incident. According to a spokesperson from the district, students are not required to pledge allegiance to the flag. Apparently this teacher didn't get the memo. I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm hurt, she said. Most so for my son. My son has never been through anything like this. I feel like this should have been handled differently. If any disciplinary action should have been taken, it should have been with the school. He shouldn't have been arrested. I want the charges dropped, and I want the school to be held accountable for what happened because it shouldn't have been handled the way it was handled, Talbot said. As the Free Thought Project previously reported, according to statistics released by the U.S. Department of Education and published by NBC News, in the 2011-2012 school year, teachers called the cops on students a total of 31,961 times in the state of California alone, leading to 6,341 arrests. If an 11-year-old boy was arrested for being unruly in the 90s, you can rest assured that this would not fly. Instead, it has become the go-to approach in the land of the free. There are a lot of documented claims of children being slammed, punched, choked, and otherwise assaulted by school resource officers for only minor infractions. In fact, the behavior of these officers is not only violent, but I would go so far as to call it abnormal. I think they should get drug tested. I'm serious. Steroids would explain this kind of behavior. Steroid use could cause this kind of behavior, if it is actually happening in those cases. And thankfully, this is not one of those school officers that went too far and attacked a poor innocent student, but... Now, my opinion on this situation, I don't think that the Pledge of Allegiance should be done at all, because most of the children who do it are most likely too young to fully comprehend what they're pledging allegiance to. They're too young to really to understand what a Pledge of Allegiance even means yet. They do not have the cognitive ability to grasp the wisdom necessary to understand it. You should do it if you're going to do it at all, you should do it no younger than 13, 14 years old, when they're actually old enough to fully comprehend the idea. Until that time, it's really not worth doing. And many foreigners who've come to America and have tried fully integrating have complained that no other country in the world does it, and it actually comes off seeming to them actually kind of creepy. And when you think about it, it really is a little creepy. Just a little creepy. It does feel a little indoctrination-y, it does feel a little eh. Mind you, I'm no liberal. I am no liberal, not anymore. Now, I'm a conservative, but I'm no statist either. Bottom line is, the Pledge of Allegiance is mostly a formality, and it's really not something that should be required or even done until they're old enough to comprehend it. Otherwise, it's literally like pre-programming or indoctrination. It has a flavor to it of that. That's just my opinion. They certainly shouldn't handle it this way. Jussie Smollett, spelled juicy, staring into the abyss of legal consequences. Yeah, well, if he ends up going to prison, his cellmate might end up thinking he is juicy, if you catch my meaning. A new report by multiple sources say that Chicago police now believe that Smollett paid brothers Alabino and Abimbola Asandero $3,500 to participate in a fake attack against him. This is seriously bad news for Smollett, as faking a violent attack might end up landing him up to 3 years in prison for his false police report. From the Conservative Tribune, considering the amount of attention Smollett's original report received from liberal celebrities and top Democrats like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, a candidate for the Democratic nomination, the latest development could be more than a little embarrassing for the country's liberal political and entertainment establishment. The men identified by ABC News as brothers Alabino and Abimbola Asundero were arrested on Wednesday as persons of interest in the investigation into Smollett's claim that he had been attacked on January 29th. The Asunderos were released 48 hours later without being charged due to Chicago law enforcement's discovery of new evidence. CNN reported, ABC News reported that Chicago police said they were eager to speak to Jussie Smollett after they released the Asunderos. According to CBS News Chicago sources, the brothers told detectives that Smollett rehearsed the attack with them in the days leading up to January 29th. Smollett reportedly told the Asunderos which items he wanted used in the assault and even paid for the rope used during the incident. As I last reported, Jussie had paid the two Nigerian brothers $3,500, and now it has come to light that an additional $500 was paid toward the act. The two brothers, currently staying at an undisclosed hotel and cooperating with the police. We can confirm that the information received from the individuals questioned by police earlier in the Empire case has in fact shifted the trajectory of the investigation. We've reached out to the Empire cast member's attorney to request a follow-up interview, Guglielmi said, as reported by CBS. Police raided the Asunderos' home on Wednesday, the same day the brothers were arrested after returning from Nigeria. CBS reported that police seized a black face mask, hat, an Empire script, phone receipts, and bleach from the brothers' home. As we all know, the staged attack included homophobic slurs, a rope around his neck, bleach poured on his head, a MAGA hat, and a shout that this is MAGA country in Chicago. Sure, yeah, okay. Smollett's attorneys, Todd S. Pugh and Victor P. Henderson, said in a statement to ABC on Saturday night that their client is angry over doubts about the legitimacy of the attack. As a victim of a hate crime who has cooperated with the police investigation, Jussie Smollett is angered and devastated by recent reports that the perpetrators are individuals he's familiar with, the statement reads. He's now been further victimized by claims attributed to these alleged perpetrators that Jussie played a role in his own attack. Nothing is further from the truth, and anyone claiming otherwise is lying. Oh, so I guess I'm a liar now. Alright. One of these purported suspects was Jussie's personal trainer, who he hired to ready him physically for a music video. The statement continued, it is impossible to believe that this person could have played a role in the crime against Jussie, or would falsely claim Jussie's complicity. Smollett has previously expressed his anger over those who doubt his claims. It feels like if I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black who attacked me, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot more. That says a lot about the place that we are in our country right now, Smollett said in an interview, Good Morning America. Pelosi called it racist and homophobic and an affront to our humanity. According to his lawyer, Smollett will continue to cooperate with law enforcement authorities. But no matter how it plays out, the celebrities and major Democrats who leaped at the chance to pontificate about the Smollett attack report should have learned a lesson about the potential for embarrassing themselves, especially when the evidence that it was all faked is so very damning. And let's be clear. Let's say these Nigerian brothers are lying. Simple principle. Simple principle. Nobody lies unless they have something to gain from it. Okay? This is a simple psychological fact. What do they have to gain from lying about it? I suppose you could say that that would get them out of trouble. But what's easier to believe? What's easier to believe about this? What makes more sense? That a pair of random Nigerian dudes could be Trump supporters who were literally not even citizens of the country, come in wearing a MAGA hat and attack some guy who's also black and gay, and they got through watching Empire, which is very much a liberal kind of show. And I'm just like, or do you believe that, you know, he staged it to try and set up some controversy? An attempt to smear Trump supporters? What makes more sense to you? What makes more sense at all? I say it's the latter as opposed to the former. Because the former just pushes the letter of belief just a little too far. Whereas the latter shows that there are many people who've been caught faking shit like this before. Or have, you know, gone to, they have nothing against the idea of lying to smear Trump and his supporters. It's what they do. Because they believe their cause is righteous, the ends justify the means, in essence. That is probably what they're thinking. So do these Nigerian brothers have something to gain if they are lying? Well, yes and no. They would be getting out of it if it was truly, they'd be escaping responsibility. However, the fact of the matter is, one thing stands out very clearly about this. Being the fact that the supposed MAGA hat was actually just a plain red hat purchased at a beauty store. Plus, they followed money trails to find this information. This was money trailed. And that is why the evidence is so damning. So bottom line is, the chances are quite high that this was indeed an attempt to smear Trump and his supporters. It's the most likely scenario, based on the evidence. Trump promises to go after the deep state for trying to unseat him. Now, my opinion on the whole deep state theory, on that there's a deep state, it really all started when they discovered that there was a secondary secret government running in Turkey that was called a deep state. And since then, people have been suggesting that there's more deep states. You know, it's a natural human tendency when you learn about a new thing, you tend to panic and spread it around everywhere. Like the whole Illuminati conspiracy bullshit. However, there is reason to believe that there is a deep state now. And it is comprised of primarily the administration of the former President Barack Obama, as well as the DOJ and certain people within the FBI. Trump took to Twitter on Monday and slammed former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, accusing him of lying following a CBS interview on Sunday, in which McCabe admitted the DOJ attempted a coup against the president. Infowars.com reports Wow, so many lies by now disgraced acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He was fired for lying, and now his story gets even more deranged, Trump tweeted. The president also blasted Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, saying that McCabe and Rosenstein, who was hired by Jeff Sessions, another beauty, looked like they were planning a very illegal act and got caught. There's a lot of explaining to do to the millions of people who had just elected a president who they really like and who has done a great job for them with the military, vets, economy, and so much more, Trump wrote. This was illegal and treasonous insurance policy, in full action. Trump added, referring to the term used by the FBI agent Peter Strzok to describe the deep state plan to oust Trump should he win the election. During McCabe's interview, he asserted that Rosenstein was counting votes, or counting possible votes, among cabinet officials to unseat the president. Attempting to exonerate himself, McCabe claimed, I didn't have much to contribute and that Rosenstein was driving the force behind the attempted coup. The Deputy Attorney General is definitely very concerned about the president, about his capacity and about his intent at that point in time. There's been several attempts to unseat Trump. It's getting to the point where it literally is like almost full-blown treason. They've been pushing the letter for some time now. And now here's a real story that's a kick in the pants. Rod Rosenstein told Andrew McCabe he would wear a wire into the White House. McCabe admitted on 60 Minutes last week that Rosenstein offered to wear a wire into the White House, and then took it a step further, according to McCabe. Rosenstein once boasted, I never got searched when I go into the White House. I could easily wear a recording device. They wouldn't know it was there. ILoveFreedom.org reports, here's where it gets tricky. CNN reports that Rosenstein denies he ever tried to wear the wire, but conflicting reports, particularly from McCabe, suggest that he mentioned it at least twice. CNN reported that Rosenstein denies he ever tried to wear the wire. No. Wear the wire, but conflicting reports, particularly from McCabe, suggest he mentioned at least twice. McCabe says Rosenstein wasn't joking, which contradicts the narrative that some claimed Rosenstein was just kidding. McCabe believes Rosenstein was serious, and that he brought it up more than once. The reports on KTVZ stated he was absolutely serious. McCabe told Pelley, and in fact he brought it up, in the next meeting we had, I never actually considered taking him up on the offer. I did discuss it with my general counsel and my leadership team back at the FBI after he brought it up the first time. Other people are sure to have worn a wire in the White House, but nothing has ever come of it. Bottom line is, Trump is clean, and this democratic temper tantrum of an investigation is done purely out of childish spite. Trump is clean. He did not collude with Russia. They're just mad that he won the election and he wasn't one of them. Just pure bitter spite. Anyway, KTVZ continued, in response to McCabe's 60 Minutes interview, a Justice Department spokesperson issued a statement late last week, saying Rosenstein never authorized any recording that Mr. McCabe references. Just because it wasn't authorized doesn't mean Rosenstein didn't want it to happen, though. In short, there's a lot of shady AAF stuff going on in the government right now that I definitely think that more evidence has come up that a deep state may in fact exist. Or at the very least, a definite coalition to try and get Trump removed as president. And I was skeptical of the whole idea. It seemed a little too nutty, a little too conspiratorial, a little too Illuminati-esque. So I was, not really much of a conspiracy theorist, although I do believe in the aliens. But, you know me. I only go where the evidence takes me. And for a while, the evidence just wasn't really taking me to the whole deep state thing. It didn't seem like a particularly realistic scenario. Until recently, when more things started to surface. And I now more or less recant my previous denial. Anyway, moving on. The recent photo of RBG is not so recent after all. The mainstream media collectively cheered last week when the 86-year-old Supreme Court justice allegedly returned to the Supreme Court after cancer surgery. The GatewayPundit.com reports Ginsburg reportedly made an appearance at a concert celebrating herself on February 4th, although no photos were released out of her at the event. Ginsburg returned to the Supreme Court on Friday, but so far there are no new shots of the 86-year-old justice. The New York Times featured image was actually taken in November. So in other words, the photo was old and out of date. More pieces click into place. Supposed sightings of Ruth Bader Ginsburg at an unrelated opera, I think it was, while the State of the Union address was going on. Many of those could have been, but these are uncorroborated sightings of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and now an outdated photo being treated as current. And medical records insisting that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is actually currently in a medically induced coma. I think what's going on here is quite obvious. I think that the left, rather that is the Democrats, are trying to make it appear as though Ruth Bader Ginsburg is perfectly healthy in an attempt to not get her removed from her Supreme Court nomination, so that hoping to delay long enough so that Trump doesn't get a chance to appoint another conservative. He's already made 2 SCOTUS picks. If he gets a third, then we'll have a totally conservative Supreme Court, which will be anti-Democrat in nature. Which is why they're trying to hold off his final third pick, should Ruth Bader Ginsburg be removed due to health reasons. They're probably hoping that she lives just long enough for Trump to go out his full 2 terms, or even just 1 term, and then they, prevent him from getting another conservative on the court. Typical dirty, filthy tactic. And while I can't concretely say that's really what's going on, admittedly, the pieces are definitely falling into place. Certainly. It's all coming into form. It's all coming into plan. The sightings of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, supposedly at the opera, could be easily explained by setting up a double, getting a convincing double, apply some makeup, throw on a pair of sunglasses to hide the fact that the eye color is different, hug a few people, sit down with a few people, watch the opera, and all's well that ends well. I'll be sure to link you to the medical records in the description of this video. You get to see for yourself, folks. You will get to see for yourself. That something is definitely up. According to Jason Chaffetz, Andrew McCabe should be doing prison time. Excuse me for a second. In an op-ed published by Fox News, Chaffetz claims McCabe should not be on criminal trial over the multiple lies he... hold on. Chaffetz claims McCabe should be put on criminal trial over the multiple lies he told federal investigators and the attempted coup committed against President Trump. FoxNews.com reports Andrew McCabe lied multiple times to federal investigators. That was the official finding in February 2018 of a scathing 39-page report by the Department of Justice, or DOJ, Office of the Inspector General. They found McCabe, then Deputy Director of Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, locked Condor. In answering questions about his authorization of disclosures in the Hillary Clinton email investigation, the referral for further action went to the DOJ. 1 year later, he is publishing a book being highlighted on CBS 60 Minutes, and walking free after lying at least 4 times, 3 of them under oath, to federal authorities investigating his conduct. Trading on the notoriety he gained from his partisan loyalty, he will now have the opportunity to monetize the duplicity that shielded Hillary Clinton from justice. Sounds to me like Andrew McCabe has come from a similar school of politics to that of Richard Nixon. In stark contrast, the subjects of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigations have been shown no such favor. Several are being prosecuted for lying to federal authorities. Much to my surprise, Mueller actually managed to get the DOJ to prosecute someone for lying to Congress, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen. That is a promising development. People who lie to Congress should be prosecuted, but not selectively. We seem to live in a world with two sets of rules, one for loyal Democrat partisans and a strict one for everyone else, especially those who supported Donald Trump. I agree with that. I've seen a lot to indicate that there's a definite double standard there. If ever there was a case that demands prosecution, McCabe's is that case. For an FBI employee, integrity and credibility are the most important tools of the trade. How can one testify credibility if they have been shown to lack candor? In FBI parlance in other cases. The Inspector General in its February 2018 report provided the DOJ with mounds of evidence, including audio recordings detailing how McCabe lacked candor in a manner designed to advance his personal interests at the expense of department leadership. For a time, McCabe was the acting director of the FBI. He, of all people, knew the rules, the law, and had a duty and responsibility to tell the truth. Yet his own colleagues found he lied. In fact, he accomplished something federal employees rarely accomplish. He was ultimately fired for his offenses. Now he's on a book tour. He should be under prosecution. I agree with that statement. At the very least, an investigation should be put into his actions. Because, like I said, he seems like he comes from a similar school of politics to Richard Nixon. Because Richard Nixon was actually an otherwise really okay guy. It's just that in his particular political strategy, he tended to lie, cheat, and steal. Because that was how he was taught. I kind of get the general feeling that Andrew McCabe kind of comes from a similar line of thinking. That politics is a dirty game and you gotta play dirty to get ahead. Nonetheless, he should definitely be put under investigation and a possible prosecution for sure. Bernie Sanders, a full-on communist and candidate in 2020. Excuse me. I wanted to let the people of the state of Vermont know about this first, Sanders said during an interview on Vermont Public Radio. And what I promise to do is, as I go around the country, is to take the values that all of us in Vermont are proud of. A belief in justice, in community, in grassroots politics, in town meetings. That's what I'm going to carry all over this country. We began the political revolution in the 2016 campaign, and now it's time to move that revolution forward, Sanders added. Sanders in the interview described President Trump as an embarrassment to our country. I think he is a pathological liar, he added. I also think he's a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, somebody who is gaining cheap political points by trying to pick on minorities, often undocumented immigrants. He threw in an unbelievable amount of far-left buzzwords in that sentence. Is Trump a genuine homophobe? He hasn't said anything truly hateful towards gay people. Is he a xenophobe? He hasn't said anything truly hateful to foreigners. Is he gaining cheap political points? Maybe, but not for the reason he thinks he is. I think he's more doing it because... I think he's more just getting cheap political points simply by being controversial. Yes, undocumented immigrants are being picked on. You know why? Because they're a problem. Get your head out of your ass, Bernie, please. But there are several problems I have with Bernie. His head being clear up into his rectum, for one. But for another, how he brings up a problem but offers no solution. He always talks about problems like we need education reform in this country, but then doesn't talk about what his education reform would actually entail. He talks about financial plans for education and infrastructural reform, as I just mentioned. But where, oh where, is the money going to come from? Oh, you know where it's going to come from. It's going to come from your tax money. And, you know, I guess it really doesn't need to be mentioned, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it anyway. I was pretty much done with him, like 110% done, when he said there should be not your money or my money, there should just be money. That is like the most straight-up communistic-ass thing that has ever been uttered by a so-called democratic socialist. Mind you, that is not to say the difference between democratic socialism and socialism doesn't exist. People will often go to the lowest common denominator in order to make their opponent look bad. They will go to the worst example. Like, I will admit that I like Ben Shapiro, but I think he's guilty of this to an extent by using AOC as an example of, because she wasn't able to come up with a difference doesn't mean that there isn't one. In case you haven't noticed, she's kind of an idiot. So, I mean, that's a bad example. You should have gone to someone a little more intelligent. Like maybe Bernie himself, or maybe Nancy Pelosi, or someone else. AOC is not a good example of anything. He will compete in a crowded primary field that has already drawn a handful of candidates, including several of his colleagues. Senator Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Elizabeth Warren. 3 years ago, during our 2016 campaign, when we brought forth our progressive agenda, we were told that ideas were radical and extreme, Sanders told supporters in an email early Tuesday. According to the New York Times, well, 3 years have come and gone, and then as a result of millions of Americans standing up and fighting back, all these policies and more are now supported by a majority of Americans, he reportedly added. This is ridiculous, alright? He's a 77-year-old man, and quite frankly, the office of president would kill him. The stress of that much power and that much responsibility at his age? I mean, would he even get one term before he just died of old age? I kind of doubt it. He's pretty old, he might get one term, but two, I doubt it. And even then, his VP would just take over. In fact, if he gets the nomination, I bet that's probably their plan. Bernie dies in office, and his VP, let's say Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, gets in that way. That would be a great political strategy if they decided to go for that. If they really wanted someone in there, that was really what they wanted. Yeah, I'm giving tips to the Democratic Party. That way they can be more intelligent. I mean, they're one of the reasons why I've almost entirely lost faith in human intelligence. It's my personal belief to some extent that we're all born stupid until we learn how to not be stupid. But anyway. Bernie's policies are pure socialist crap that would be sure to bankrupt us. He's just going to keep spending and spending and increase our already huge debt. We're already $21 trillion in the hole. Trump brought us down a little bit, thank goodness. But it's still not enough. Bernie would very certainly bring us back down, further into the hole for sure. Because you know he's just going to take all that tax money and spend and spend and spend. That's what these socialist types tend to do. The 2020 race will be Sanders' second shot at the White House, at a time when Trump remains deeply unpopular among Democrats. He mounted an insurgent bid for the Democratic nomination in 2016, taking on former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was widely seen at the time as a shoo-in for the nomination. Despite Clinton's sweeping national profile and adept fundraising abilities, Sanders managed to win a handful of primary contests, including in New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana, largely outperforming the expectations of many political observers. Still, the progressive firebrand eventually ceded the nomination to Clinton, but only after intense infighting between progressives and more establishment-minded Democrats. In the years since 2016, Sanders has come to wield significant influence in the Democratic circles. His proposal for a Medicare for all healthcare system, once seen by many in the party as a fringe proposal, has received the backing of a number of Democrats, including Gillibrand, Harris, and Warren. And Sanders crisscrossed the country in 2018 campaign for candidates who align themselves with his brand of progressivism. While Sanders has become a kind of progressive superstar in recent years, his presidential bid is likely to put him at the center of an ongoing debate in the Democratic Party over race, age, and identity. The Democratic primary field is shaping up to be among the largest and most diverse in the party's history. And some Democrats argue that Sanders does not reflect the ethnic, gender, or racial diversity of the electorate that handed Democrats sweeping victories in the House, the 2018 midterms. If Sanders scores the Democratic nomination in 2020, he would be the oldest person to win either major party's presidential nod. 78 years old at the time of the Democratic National Convention. What's more, Sanders has faced some criticism in recent weeks over claims that his 2016 presidential campaign failed to adequately address allegations by female staffers that they suffered sexual harassment from campaign officials. Uh-oh, here come the complaints. Here come the accusations. Here comes the venomous spitting and the vitriol. The Vermont senator has since apologized and has vowed to crack down on misconduct. But Sanders' allies argued that his political brand focused largely on curbing the influence of Wall Street and aiding working-class America. It makes him competitive in many of the states that Trump carried in 2016, like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Supporters also tout the senator as an authentic and ahead of many of his colleagues on issues like health care and affordable higher education, positions that have been adopted by an increasing number of Democrats in recent years. A Republican National Committee spokesman on Tuesday called Sanders a self-avowed socialist who wants to double your taxes so the government can take over your health care. The vast majority of voters oppose his radical agenda, just like they are going to oppose all. The 2020 Democrats who have rushed to embrace it, Michael Ahrens said in a statement, early polls show Sanders finishing near the top of the pack of potential Democratic contenders. A Des Moines Register CNN Mediacom poll of likely 2 Iowa caucus goers conducted in December showed the Vermont senator in second place after former Vice President Joe Biden, who has not yet announced whether he'll run in 2020. A recent straw poll by the liberal blog Daily Kos showed Sanders in fourth place, trailing Harris, Warren, and Biden. Yeah, good old communist Bernie Sanders. European news. In the European news, Macron warns that attempts need to be made to stop further attempts at leaving the EU. Macron has an upcoming speech in which he will describe Brexit as a wake-up call, a call telling that Europe must be more assertive in the face of rival world powers. His words are intended as a warning shot for a continent unable to project power and defend itself, say aides. They describe the speech as Mr. Macron's most important since he urged fundamental reform of the European Union in 2017. This is a critical time, said a source close to President Macron. If we Europeans don't want to have other Brexit and become trapped in a naive defense of status quo, we have to wake up. Mr. Macron's speech coincides with rising tensions in the West, which has been shaken by U.S. President Donald Trump's America First policies and Britain's departure from the EU. A more assertive China and Russia also pose significant challenges. Although the French president will use Brexit as the main impetus for his speech, the aim is not to offer an initiative to unblock the negotiating stalemate between London and Brussels. He won't comment on the negotiation or offer some kind of Macron plan to fix the problem. The idea is to draw the lessons from Brexit, said the source. In Mr. Macron's view, Brexit is part of the same phenomenon that brought Trump to power and sparked the Yellow Vest movement in France. A fear of losing out from globalization, territorial inequalities, and rising contempt for the establishment. The French president will focus on campaigning a Europe that protects in the May 26 European election, and he will try to convince voters with plans aimed at reforming Europe's trade competition, digital and climate policies. The speech will seek to convince his European counterparts who have watered down many of his 2017 proposals, to start thinking of the EU as a tougher geopolitical player in a ruthless world. The EU has done the internal regulation rather well, but a nice peaceful area with benign trade and regulation competition. But Europe hasn't understood how to carry itself in a brutal world, said the source. Meanwhile, Gibraltar's leader has said on incursion into British waters by a Spanish warship at the weekend as a quixotic attempt at intimidation. But he said the people of Gibraltar would stand up to bullies before and after Brexit on March 29th. Anyone who believes in the rules-based international legal order will have been shocked by the cavalier and quixotic actions of the Spanish military vessel at the weekend, said Gibraltar Chief Minister Fabian Picardo. This childish behavior is unsatisfactory, whether it is errant or direct from above, said Picardo. The people of Gibraltar won't be bullied now or after the 29th of March. Mr. Picardo said the Spanish vessel sailed through Gibraltar's waters with her weapons uncovered, according to Reuters. Before we move on to the next story, I want to make a quick prediction. And I guarantee you that this is going to happen. If, and I stress if, the EU does develop its own military, it will become a bully state, and it will start terrorizing, threatening, and just otherwise coercing with force any of its other member states or outsiders into doing what they want them to do. That's a European tradition. It's happened many times before, and it'll happen again. Because before America started world policing, guess who was doing it first? England. Britain did it first. Then we started doing it, and now the EU will start doing it too. I guarantee you. A European bully state. Mark my words. The divide among the British becomes even greater as Brexit talks resume. Brexit talks resumed in Brussels on Monday night, with the British focused almost entirely on legal language to put a time limit on the Irish backstop. But as the clock to British departure ran down to 40 days, EU officials and diplomats expressed increasing concern that London's focus on the backstop, the insurance policy that guarantees an open border on the island of Ireland, made a deal ever more unlikely. British Prime Minister Theresa May arrives in Brussels on Wednesday for talks with European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, while her Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay will simultaneously resume his discussion with EU officials. Mr. Barclay told journalists that he and EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier had a positive meeting on Monday and suggests that its overrun was testimony to the constructive engagement of both sides. He said they had discussed the backstop with British Attorney General Geoffrey Cox, who was also present exploring legal means to reconcile what British sources described as the gap between the Irish protocol's description of the backstop as temporary and its indefinite legal effect. They also discussed the Malthouse Compromise, a refashioned version of already rejected British proposals for a technological solution to the border. After also meeting Mr. Barnier, Minister of Foreign Affairs Simon Coveney insisted they had agreed that the EU-UK withdrawal agreement reached in November was not going to be reopened. Mrs. May wants the EU to agree to changes to the backstop element of the deal. Mr. Coveney said he did not believe it would be possible to resolve the backstage issues with legally binding language outside the withdrawal agreement, as reportedly suggested by Mr. Cox. That is essentially saying that you take the backstop out of the withdrawal agreement. That's not going to happen. It remains unclear, however, whether Mr. Cox, seen as a key persuader of backbenchers for Mrs. May, perceived the reopening of the agreement as necessary. Such issues and potential legal language will be explored as the discussions on Wednesday. Mr. Coveney said it was important that the UK raise expectations in Westminster, that there is a redrafting of the withdrawal agreement possible. Echoing sentiments widely heard in Brussels, he pointed to what is seen in Brussels as the only viable way of forging a Brexit deal capable of winning both the House of Commons majority and EU approval. Namely, a British embrace of proposals from Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. These involve the UK remaining in the customs union and large ports of the single market. The EU is very open to that solution, and the UK will actually pursue it. He said, but the onus has to be on London. The logjam and problems are in London, and the solutions have come out of London. In London, Mr. Corbyn faces new problems of his own, as 7 Labour MPs announced their defection from the party to form a new independent group. It is the largest exodus from any British parliamentary party since the establishment of the Social Democratic Party in 1981. The 7 have been longtime critics of Mr. Corbyn, not least on his Brexit policy. And the government was facing further embarrassment with the announcement by Japanese car maker Honda of the closure of its only British car plant in Swindon in 2022 with the loss of 3,500 jobs. Ouch. Local Conservative MP Justin Tomlinson insisted that this is not Brexit related. It is a reflection of the global market. They are seeking to consolidate production in Japan. Honda said it would not be providing any comment on the speculation. These discussions, they're trying to come up with a way to make Brexit safe and, trying to make it safe and not have it be a total disaster. And I understand how these governments think. They think that any time they don't get their way, total chaos is bound to ensue. That's how they've come to think. They think themselves as being very, very important, when in fact, a lot of the time, not so much. But that is not to say that there won't be something of a disaster if Brexit goes off without a hitch and they don't have some sort of safety net or something to fall back on. But they exaggerate the proportion. It's almost like they act like they don't have any economy of their own, that they're so dependent on the EU. I mean, if they're that dependent on the EU, well, that's their own damn fault. And it's time to face the music. But really, these talks seem fairly innocent, and as far as the whole thing with Honda, Japan is free to... The Honda company is free to take their production back to Japan if they want to. They don't have to answer to the British. No one has to answer to the British. We don't have to answer to the British. We don't want to either. Bottom line is, everyone's free to do what they want. They have obligations, but they're free to do what they want. If they want to ignore those obligations, fine. That's their prerogative. But quite frankly, the dangers of a no-deal Brexit have been greatly exaggerated, in my opinion. And Britain just needs to go full steam ahead at this point. They're not going to get a deal from the EU. They're just going to have to make sure that to do a no-deal Brexit and try to land on their feet as softly as possible. Create the financial equivalent of what is basically a trampoline. Our final story in European news today features the Italian 5-Star Group. This group called 5-Star is currently blocking the trial of Matteo Salvini for kidnapping. Apparently he kidnapped somebody? Interesting. Members of Italy's anti-establishment 5-Star movement have voted to block a kidnapping trial against Matteo Salvini, leader of League, averting possible embarrassment for the ruling coalition government. A poll held on the 5-Star's web platform, Rosao, on Monday ended up with 59% of voters deciding not to push for Mr. Salvini's legal immunity to be lifted. The Interior Minister is being investigated by Sicilian prosecutors over his blocking a Coast Guard vessel from entering Italy in August last year with 177 migrants on board. 5-Star burst on the Italian political scene with a vow to tackle decades of political corruption scandals. It also promised that it would operate as a digital direct democracy, allowing its army of online activists to decide party policy through votes on the Rosao platform. As an Italian senator, Mr. Salvini enjoys immunity from prosecution unless the Senate votes to lift it, which would require 5-Star to vote to do so. That has placed the party, which has long argued against Italian politicians enjoying immunity from prosecution, under pressure to find a way placating its members while not endangering its alliance with Mr. Salvini's league. Before Monday's vote, Five Star called on its members to support Mr. Salvini, arguing that his actions to block the migrant ship were carried out as part of his role as an interior minister and were signed off by the government collectively. It is an unprecedented case because never in the post has the judiciary asked Parliament to authorize a trial for a minister who had acted in the performance of his duties. The party wrote on its blog before the vote over whether to lift Mr. Salvini's immunity has come as Five Star's popularity is slipping ahead of European elections in May, having been overtaken by Mr. Salvini's anti-migrant league in national opinion polls. Some Five Star figures criticized the unclear wording of the online poll, which was phrased in a way that they argue made it unclear what members were voting on. Beppe Grillo, the politically incorrect comedian who co-founded the party and for years served as its public face, but who now is not officially involved with its Dolly operations, joked that the question was phrased as a catch-22. Bottom line is, they shouldn't block. They should not block Matteo Salvini from having to have a trial. If he really did do something illegal, then he should face trial. If he's really the only guy who's anti-immigration you have, consider this as an option. Raise up another possible candidate to take his place if he really is guilty, so you can continue to fight for the cause. Blocking him from due process makes you look bad. It makes you look criminal. If you want to have a reputation, if you want the people to support you, you need to learn to get them on your side. Look like the good guy. Look like the hero. Don't look like the villain. And that's all I gotta say about that. Science news, our final story today. Some scientists claim that they can at least kind of measure the air pressure of early Earth. I kind of got to ask myself, how exactly are they going to measure the air pressure of what early Earth was? That seems a little dubious. But the article goes on to say, what was the Earth like way before the dinosaurs? Scientists are interested in that question for many reasons. But for me, it is because the air back then was very different. If you transported yourself in a time machine to Earth 3 billion years ago, which is more than 2.5 billion years before the dinosaurs, you better have brought a breathing mask and some sunscreen. As the doors of your time machine opened on this alien landscape, you would die, with a sunburn, as there was no oxygen in the air and the UV radiation would have been brutal. Without oxygen, there would have been no protective ozone layer. However, back then, Earth was teeming with microbial life. So, the conditions would be not totally dissimilar to, say, Venus. One of the many reasons I enjoy being a deep-time geologist is because it's fun to picture yourself on this ancient alien landscape. Except for the dying part, of course. Imagine the landscape with no grass, no animals, and no trees. Volcanoes dotted the landscape, the moon was substantially closer, and so the tides were stronger. The planet was rotating faster, so the days were shorter by a couple of hours, and the air pressure was also likely different. Oh, and the sun was fainter, yes, even our star was different. As a result, many scientists, including myself, consider our ancient Earth to be our closest exoplanet. That is the article. Exoplanets are planets that orbit faraway stars. These planets are so far away that humans will not, in the next century at least, be able to land rovers and probes on them, the way we do with Mars. However, studying ancient Earth is just as exciting as studying exoplanets, in my very biased opinion, says this particular scientist. Because of the story that rocks can tell us about what early Earth was like, rocks are the history books of planets. Learning how to read them unravels some of the most exciting stories ever written. One aspect of my research has been to figure out how to read rocks for new information. In particular, I have been fascinated with air pressure. Air pressure is valuable because it tells you the maximum amount of gas that can be in the air. This is important for multiple reasons. The first is that it limits which goes could have been present in the air to keep our planet warm. Remember, the fainter Remember the fainter sun. Back then, if the ancient air was the same as it is today, our planet would have been frozen over. Yet there's plenty of evidence, and the rocks for liquid rivers, rain, and oceans on the ancient Earth. That means gases in different quantities than the day were present in the ancient air, keeping the planet warm. The second reason gets the astronomers excited. Can you tell just from the gases in the air that a planet is alive? It was a very active area of research, and the answer is yes, in an increasing number of cases. The holy grail of exoplanet astronomy is the unambiguously detect life on another planet. Astronomers do this by measuring air present on those faraway worlds using light. Because ancient Earth was so different than today, yes, was very much alive. The ancient Earth's air may provide an unambiguous example of a planet that can host life that is different from modern Earth. This particular scientist in this article goes on to say, in the study led by my student Shaylin Silverman, we asked ourselves a slightly different question. Can life record air pressure? And if so, can you find a fossil of that life in rocks? The answer to that first question and the main result of this study is yes. We grew a form of green algae called cyanobacteria under different pressures of nitrogen, the likely dominant gas of the ancient air, and looked for a difference in shape and in the composition of the bacteria. In both cases, we found differences. The cyanobacteria that we use look like daisy chains of beads, where each bead is a cell. Along the daisy chain are slightly larger cells called heterocysts that specialize in processing nitrogen for other cells to function properly. We hypothesized that the distance between those specialized cells would change with changes in the pressure of nitrogen the cyanobacteria were exposed to, and we were right. He goes on to say, we then looked at the composition of the nitrogen in cyanobacteria, grown at the different pressures, and found differences too. Nitrogen is composed of different isotopes, which is to say nitrogen atoms with an extra neutron in the nucleus. As a result, there are heavy nitrogens and light nitrogen atoms in our experiment. We observed changes in the heavy to light nitrogen ratio, with changing nitrogen pressures. Why might this be? Life often follows the path of least resistance when the nitrogen pressure is high. There is plenty of nitrogen everywhere, and the cyanobacteria will prefer to use the lighter nitrogen as it is easier to process. With decreasing nitrogen, the cyanobacteria don't have the luxury of being picky anymore, so they have to choose heavier nitrogen atoms. This is what causes the ratio differences that Shailene observes. The final statement of this article is, while these shape changes would be difficult to find in fossils because they don't preserve well, the nitrogen composition might still be detectable in rocks. So that could be the next step. The goal is to develop a way to read old rocks on present-day Earth to tell us something about the air pressure of ancient Earth. Cyanobacteria have shown their potential to contribute meaningfully to this exciting science. Okay, so my initially dubious thoughts on this. It seems a little more likely than I initially considered. Because that whole cyanobacteria thing, yeah. That seems a little more likely than I initially thought. That article on the Italian news, that was technically copyrighted, so hopefully I don't get sued. But yeah, anyway, that's it for the Unglobalist today, folks. Have yourselves a good day.